but we have taste buds. Got it. Okay, we have taste buds that run through the entirety of our digestive tract. So our body, and they're not connected to our brain. We don't sense it like we do the ones on our tongue, but our body is sampling the food as it's going through the system all the way through. So we're getting information on a biochemical level about the safety of the environment we're in. Do we have food security? What season is it? Are there plenty of fruits around, or is this the time when those things are scarce? So food is information to our brains about the environment that we're in. And the human body is really a stimulus response machine, right? It's something that we give inputs to our body and it responds in the ways that it functions. And foods contain signaling molecules that interact with our genes. So what we eat influences how our bodies function and influences how our bodies or how our genes activate or inactivate. And I have down here in the third point, the human diaspora. And that's just saying, you know, humans started on this planet in Africa, and when they moved out from there, the different things that they encountered along the way, the different foods that they had in different environments changed their genetics. So some people survived in one environment because they had the genes that survived in that environment, and other people in others. So again, just as humans have moved around the world, we've changed genetically because of our environment. And so what's good for one population of people might not be good for another population, just depending on their inheritance. Does that all make sense to you guys?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, when we talk about like a Alaskan native diet, they really didn't have access to a lot of plant foods. So what's high in their diet is going to be what's in their environment. And that's, you know, seals and whales and seaweeds and things like that. And then Polynesian diets, right, they're in a tropical environment, lots of different foods there. So we'll kind of talk about, again, just the idea that there is no one size fits all human diet that everybody is going to relate to and be healthy with. I put this little note about iodine and coastal proximity. Iodine is a mineral that is from the ocean, and anywhere else that is found on Earth is just an effect of the ocean having deposited it there. So on the coastal regions, we have a really high concentration of iodine in the foods that are there, the plants and things that are grown there. Whereas, you know, in the Central Plains, there's not very much iodine available at all. So people that lived in those different areas, I think you guys, maybe you've heard that thyroid function is dependent on iodine. And for some people, maybe whose ancestors were in the plains and didn't encounter much iodine, it can be toxic to them to have high levels of iodine. So they eat a lot of seafood and things, that's not good for them. And people, conversely, that come from, you know, coastal peoples, if they're not getting enough iodine in their diet, they're going to suffer from the lack of iodine. But again, it's just dependent on your particular genes. Again, this is just that human diaspora, right? This is showing, if you can see Africa with the dark red, that's the origins of man, right? This is where we came from. And every other route along there is just showing how we move through the world to different continents. Generally speaking, we were traveling near oceans and near coastal ways. So a lot of like seafood is great for humans because it's something that our bodies, you know, are very accustomed to eating. A basic ancestral human diet was something that was seasonal. We've really lost that in the modern world, and we tend to, you know, we can eat strawberries from Chile any time of year that we want, but our bodies still do respond to seasonal cues. And so if you're eating seasonally with what's available in your area, generally better for you. But our ancestors, they had seasonal foods with a really wide variety. It was whatever they could hunt and gather in their area. They ate a large volume of food, and those foods were nutrient dense. Here's just some examples of African hunter-gatherer diets. So early humans in Africa, if you can see the columns with percentage of animal foods and percentage of plant foods, those are really sort of almost half and half, or 1/3 to 2/3 in proportions. They vary. Some of them eat more animals and some have more plants, but it was kind of a really balanced diet between animal and plant food. Moving out to other parts of the world, we have people from, you know, these locations, the second column, Australia, Alaska, you know, all over other areas hunter-gatherer peoples lived. they had different kinds of food densities. Like again, I said before, the Alaskan natives, that's about the sixth line down there. 99% of their diet is animal foods, with 1% is plant foods. And we would think, gosh, how can that possibly be healthy? Because now we say you need a balanced diet with lots of nutrients from lots of sources. You need plant foods because they've got fiber and all these things. Well, how do they survive without it? They do because their ancestry dictated that. Those are the foods that they lived with, and those are the foods that are best for them. And so eating, whale meat and steel blubber and fermented elk and things like that, those are really, really great foods for them. And they got all the nutrients they needed out of it. Their bodies were adapted to that. I'm going to change this up a little bit. I just said, you really want a diet that's diverse and full of different nutrients. But just like the Alaskan natives, the shepherds in Kenya, we've got Samburu and Maasai tribes. And those people, they live entirely on raw milk, blood, and meat. They don't eat vegetables because they just consider that, food for their animals. They don't eat plant foods. So what does that do for them, right? Any cardiologist today would probably think, oh, what a terrible thing that they're eating all this meat and all these saturated fats. But for them, this is a very healthy diet. They have very high intakes of cholesterol, but their total serum cholesterol in their bloodstream is a nice low range. Again, different people are adapted to eating very different diets. When we take people that are hunter-gatherers and we take them off of their traditional diet and put them onto modern diets, they can really suffer. Now, they didn't suffer these diseases until civilization came in and really changed the way that we eat. Agriculture came in and food industrialization. We consider these diseases of civilization. So even having cavities, that's what dental caries are. Dental caries are just having cavities in your teeth. Malocclusions are teeth that don't fit properly inside your mouth. They your teeth overlap or your bite is wrong. Those things can just come from, not having proper nutrition in utero when you're developing. If your mother doesn't have good nutrition, then when you're developing your cranium and your skeleton, your mouth the arches of your bone don't grow big enough to fit all those teeth in. Anyway, so there's a lot of things that our modern diet is causing us to suffer with: cardiovascular diseases, obesity, diabetes, immune problems, and all types of cancer. And all of these things are absent in hunter-gatherer peoples. Some of those plant foods that people would have had access to before agriculture would have been these foods and in these proportions. So wild fruits were about 41% of ancestral humans' diet. But wild fruits are not like the cultivated fruits we have now. Think of a little crab apple. They were small, they were tart, they weren't loaded with sugar like a Granny Smith apple is now. So wild fruits that had a lot less sugar density than ours do now. Seeds and nuts, tubers, roots, things they could dig up, and then leaves, etc. And most of the leaves, again, in early human ancestry would have been in the brassica family or in the cabbage and kale family. Things that tell us that humans adapted on this planet to eat a diet that was rich in produce, because there's arguments about, what's the perfect human diet? Should we really be, Paleolithic and mostly carnivores and like keto style dieting, or should we be vegans and vegetarians? Again, it really it looks like humans are meant to be omnivores because we have these adaptations in our bodies that let us eat a produce-rich diet. One of those things can be just color vision. The fact that we have really complex color vision and we can see different colors of fruits and things, then we know when they're ripe, we know when they're safe. So color vision was so we could choose the best produce. Also, helped us with some dangers with, animals and predators and things like that. But a big part of knowing what was a good food to eat was the fact that we could see the colors of the fruits. The fact that our bodies need really high vitamin C intake, but we can't make it inside our own bodies. That's a a nutrition or a nutrient that we can only get from fresh fruits and fresh vegetables. And so if we weren't able to eat a lot of those, that's not something that, humans were going to be able to survive without. So ability to, digest plant foods is just built into us. All right. And I put here house-rated intestines. That just means our intestines have these bulges in them, and it slows down how fast things move through our large intestine. And that gives us more time to ferment the fibers that we eat, because we can extract a lot of nutrition out of that. Now we have that kind of intestine, but our primate relatives, they have, multiple times more length of their large intestines, because they have to ferment a lot of vegetables to get their nutritional needs met. As humans, we don't have to get that much. We don't need that much space in our large intestine, because we have other nutrients that are good for us too. Here's one thing, it's just some evolutionary adaptations that mean we should also eat a starch-rich diet. Again, this is something that chimpanzees don't have as much of this amylase enzyme, because they're not going to eat as much starch as we are, and they can't tolerate as much starch as we can. So starch was something that's really important in a human diet, because it gives us a lot of calorie energy, whereas we can't really eat that much fruit. We couldn't eat the same amount of fruit to get the calories from it, because our livers actually can't tolerate that much fructose. We can stand a certain amount of fructose before it becomes toxic to our livers, just like alcohol would be. It becomes something we have to clear out as a toxin rather than use for fuel. So again, you saw 41% of the human diet was fruit, but again, early fruits weren't really that high in fructose sugar like the ones we have now are. Anyway, I'm getting really in the weeds, but let me move along. Early animal foods, right? So what we ate for animals was also very different in early days. It was what we call ruminant animals, which are elk and bison and deer and things like that, which developed on the plains. They eat grasses. They concentrate some omega-3 fatty acids from those grasses into their meat. Really, really great for us. Lots of minerals and vitamins come in through their meat and fat. Again, people that were more coastal, they were relying more on seafood and whales for their nutrient needs. Seafood was a really important source for developing brains in early humans. Again, most, early humans lived in Africa near the coast, so they ate a lot of seafood, and seafood contains a really high concentration of omega-3 fatty acids, which is vital for human brain development. There's one called DHA that is like the dividing line between us and earlier primates, that we have so much more of that it allows us to grow these very big brains. And so having these, seafoods in our diet allowed humans to develop these big brains. And then we, traveled around the world, staying along the coast so we could continue to have those big foods in our diet. Here's some of the things that show that we were adapted early to eat meat. So again, we don't make great vegans, or we don't make great carnivores entirely. We're omnivores. We have the kind of teeth that are good for eating meat. We also don't have, the big canine teeth to tear things apart. Our gut functions differently in order to get nutrition out of meat. I think I'm getting kind of in the weeds for you all, but you could read all those details if you want to. But essentially, our bodies are meant to eat meat products. We get a lot of nutrition from those sources. There are a lot of vitamins and nutrients that we get from meats that we can't get from plant foods, or if we do get them from plant foods, we can't get enough of them. So essential fatty acids, you guys have probably heard of essential fatty acids, right? Well, essential always means it's just something we have to eat. And so we can't make it. Essential fatty acids for us are these long chain fatty acids. Like I said, that DHA for our brains, that's an omega-3 fat. A lot of people hear, oh, omega-3 fatty acids, I can get that from chia. I can get that from flaxseed. Yes, you can. You can get short chain fatty acids from those plant sources, but humans lack the enzymes in our body that allow us to elongate and make the more health promoting long chain fatty acids. So what we have to do is we have to let the fish and other animals do that for us. And then we can get the direct long chain fatty acids from them. When I say that, to get the DHA that you need, you can either just eat fish, or if you eat chia or flax, you will only convert about 5% of that into those longer chain fatty acids. So very, very minimal ability to get from those sources. So this is, again, where we get them from animal sources. They're preformed and ready to go for us. Oops, I went too far.
That last slide there, Dr. Lauri, was so good, because you were actually touching into the essentials that we actually have to have that can easily come through meat. So those of you guys that are listening that may be vegan, that doesn't, she's not necessarily saying, yes, you must eat meats, because there's supplementations to be able to cover these essentials, but it's truly the essentials within the bodies that we have to have for good brain health, good skin health, eye health, everything within our body. The building blocks are the essentials that she's covering here. And that's a really good slide, that if we're not eating enough of these, whether it's no matter what's in our diet, we've got to have those covered. I love that particular slide. Thank you for including that.
Great. Yeah. And that is a good point. You can have your preferences, or, maybe even you've got like spiritual practice or something that doesn't allow you to eat certain foods. But if they were key to early humans, we're going to have to supplement that, because you just can't do without them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Here's some information when we're looking at different types of meat. And again, comparing what our early human ancestors would have had access to in comparison to what we have these days. The meats in the yellow, those are things that were, wild game. And the protein to fat, you can see it's much higher, right? The proportion of protein to fat is much greater. And current foods that we have access to on the bottom here, it's just the opposite, right? The protein to fat ratios are really skewed, and we don't get as much protein per fat. Speaking of fat content, particularly in the ruminant animals, right? The ones like elk, deer, and then pasture-fed steer and grain-fed steer. So the cows that we eat these days, you either get grain-fed. If it's not labeled to say anything in particular, it's grain-fed. And if it's pasture-fed or grass-fed, grass-finished, that's the other column here. So looking at these, you can just see with the elk and deer and antelope, there are really high levels of a lot of these fats, which are, great healthy fats for us. But with cows, we get a lot less of all those fat, but the concentrations also change. If you can see the green lines, so the two rows that are green, those are the types of fatty acids that are anti-inflammatory to our bodies. And the pasture-fed, I bolded, you can see they've got a higher content of those than grain-fed. And the orange rows, those are pro-inflammatory fat. They create inflammation in our body, and they're much higher in the grain-fed. So again, if you're dealing with inflammation, and if you're going to be eating very much beef, you really should be aiming towards the grass-fed and grass-finished over traditional, just because it's going to change the way your body's going to manage and process inflammation. It either pushes you into a pro-inflammatory state or helps with reducing inflammation.
That is so important for people to understand, that if you choose meat, to choose the ones that have been grass-fed or that are wild for that maximum nutrition, and the other variables that come along with the meat from a health standpoint and the impact within our own body. Putting, again, a better quality fuel provides us better quality building blocks. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you for your comment. So this would be a food pyramid for early humans, mostly animal products there down at the bottom, fruits, vegetables, nuts and berries, things like that. Using the hunter-gatherer proportions, this is a 2,000 calorie daily diet, using the proportions that, again, our early ancestors would have eaten. So meats would have been 35% of their diet. Fruits, 27%. So you can see in descending order there what they ate. We've got some serving sizes, numbers of servings per day to get you to those totals, to get you to that 2,000 calories a day. With this, for those of you who track macros and look for that at the bottom, that would be about 45% carbohydrates, 24% protein, and 31% fat. About 82% of their diet was plant food and 18% animal, even though the majority of the nutrients were coming from the animal sources. The real bulk of their diet was plant foods. This is just a little look at what that would look like in foods. So it's either lunch 1 or lunch 2. It's not both lunches. So it's either or when you're looking at that. But each one is going to have some kind of meat or eggs or fish or some animal protein to reach about 15.5 to 16 ounces a day. Other common features of hunter-gatherer diets, it wasn't just, about the specific foods they ate, it was also how they ate. Intermittent meals. Nowadays, we have something, we call it intermittent fasting, but really, I think what most people are doing that follows that is actually called time-restricted feeding. Time-restricted feeding means within a 24-hour period, you only eat specific hours of the day. And so that's, a modern way that we're trying to sort of mimic some intermittent meals. But really think about it. Early humans, they didn't go to the grocery store. They didn't have restaurants. There was no meal deliveries. It was whatever they could collect for the day, whatever the hunters could gather and bring back. They weren't eating regular meals all the time, which also is something to know. Like human energy balance is, our bodies are really adept at these systems of we eat something, we put it away into storage, and then we bring it out later for the fuel that we need. So we didn't have to eat regularly. This whole idea that you've got to eat 5 small meals throughout the day is just bunk. That is just, humans never would have survived on this planet if to keep our metabolism up, we had to eat multiple times through the day. That's just not realistic. And in fact, they had periods of fasting, either for rituals or again, just the season didn't bring them all the nutrients they needed. So humans are really great at storing nutrients and storing fuel. Both cooked and raw foods were consumed. So raw foods can be great, but no human, native humans ever consumed 100% raw diet. In fact, that's one of the things that, started Homo sapiens sapiens on this earth was that we learned to cook foods, and cooking of foods was already happening to unlock nutrients, and that allowed the brain size to grow into the humans that we are today. So cooking foods is important, but raw foods do have their benefits, so it's good to have some raw foods as well. When cooking things like nuts, seeds, and tubers, those can sometimes have some irritating compounds in them, some alkaloids and bitter compounds. So again, soaking those and processing those correctly can take some of the irritating compounds out of them. And, oh my goodness, my screen just went blank, sorry.
Looks like it's still up there and you're on daily and indirect.
So the sun exposure, right. So, vitamin D is something that we often think we get through our foods because we have vitamin D fortified milk and things like that. But really, vitamin D is a nutrient that our bodies make when our skin is exposed to sunlight, because we have layers of cholesterol in our skin. And when the sun hits that, it converts that and creates some vitamin D. So vitamin D is something that early humans got through direct, or indirect sun exposure each day. What was absent from hunter-gatherer diet? Some of the things that we have in our, regularly in our world now were just, not something that early humans had any access to. And it's something that our bodies still don't really know how to manage or deal with, because these are unnatural foods to us. A lot of these processed meats and refined sugars, vegetable oils, things like that. So vegetable oils, I'll say particularly things like, canola oil, not great, just because seed oils have to be heat and pressure and sometimes solvents are used to extract those oils out of that plant material, and it can damage and oxidize those fats. So vegetable oils, corn oil, sunflower, safflower, those sorts of things, not the healthiest oils there are. But did you know that olive oil is simply, it's olive juice, right? You take olives, you crush them, you extract the liquid, and that is olive oil. So it's not refined highly, there's no pressure, there's no solvents. So olive oil is a really, early adopted human oil. We could get that just by crushing. And then also crushing the olives, there are a lot of other nutrients. There's vitamin E, there's all sorts of great things in there. So again, not all oils fall under this bad category. Vegetable oils, olive oil is a great one. Okay, so looking at modern hunter-gatherer peoples, we've had contact with people who are still hunter-gatherers, the early Apache people of South America. This is just to show that these early diets, we talk now about, the nutrient density and, with the agriculture and the way we feed people. We've got a lot more foods to go around and feed people and keep us alive. But the longevity in hunter-gatherer people's eating traditional diets is fantastic. Although infant mortality is very high, under age of 5, 30 to 40% of children are lost. But if these folks made it through all the infections and accidents to a ripe old age of 19 or 20 years old, their mortality rates were very, very low. And they had the prospect of living to a reasonably old age and in a healthful state. So there was longevity in the hunter-gatherers. Now, if we want to get the benefits of adopting that sort of lifestyle ourselves, there are some studies like this one. This is sort of a small study. There were only 20 subjects, but it lasted for 3 weeks. And what they did was they allowed a diet that was similar to what our hunter-gatherer ancestors would have eaten. They omitted and banned the processed foods that we're used to, that we just discussed. And what the result was, after 3 weeks, just 3 weeks on that type of diet that was really nutrient dense, their body weight decreased, their waist circumference decreased, their systolic blood pressure went down, and their plasminogen activating factor inhibitor, which is something that's just related to clotting, blood clotting, was reduced. So their overall health improved in just a short time of changing their diet, which is one thing I like to tell my patients a lot, that, if you change your diet, if we have your labs and they're not looking good, maybe your cholesterol is out of whack, your blood sugar and insulin don't look great, 30 days of a diet change and we retest you, we can see dramatic differences. So our bodies, like I said, they're adaptation machines, right? It's a stimulus response. We give them the right stuff, they respond very differently.
Dr. Lauri, and you just used an important verbiage that I like to say to people too. It is a machine, and we have to know what our machine operates best on and pay attention to those clues, not just to the labs, but the inflammation or energy levels, so that we can tune in. As you originally said, everybody is slightly different based on their origins. We may have the bases as you're describing, but being able to pay attention and find our optimum fuel is so important. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Okay, I'm not going to go too far into digestive function. I will mention, I do at my private practice, Living Wellness Medical Center, I do have webinars that I have done before for my practice, and they're recorded. So I have a webinar on my website all about the ins and outs of digestive function from top to bottom, everything you want to know. If you want a full webinar about how your gut is supposed to work, some of the ways it commonly goes offline, then that would be for you. So you can get more details. But I'll just go over this briefly. The first idea just being, we say that old adage, you are what you eat. Yes, it's true. You build your body. Every cell in your body is made from what you have eaten, but it's not just what you eat, it's what you assimilate. So in order to get the nutrients from your food, first thing, top priority, number one is chew, right? When you have a meal, you put that bite in, chew, 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 chew until your food is practically liquid before you swallow it. You've mixed it with all of the amylase enzyme in your mouth to start breaking carbohydrates down. You've broken down those foods so that when it hits your stomach, the acids can get to all of it and really, really thoroughly digest it. So chewing, it's something I know I'm guilty of this. I have to coach myself through it. And, I start a meal and I'm just shoveling it in and I stop, take a breath, breathe from the belly and think about chewing. So chewing is really important. Also, where our nutrients are absorbed and assimilated into our body is through our small intestine. And so we have to have a well-functioning small intestine to absorb the nutrients. Things like celiac disease, SIBO, IBS, enzyme deficiencies, other things can stop us from assimilating nutrients well. So having a well-functioning gut is key to getting the nutrients from your foods in the first place. And then there are different hormonal influences on our nutrition too. So for instance, if you have good vitamin D levels, it's a hormone, it's a pro-hormone. Vitamin D, it signals our intestines to absorb more calcium from the foods that we eat. So if you have a good vitamin D status, you don't have to eat extraordinary levels of calcium. You're going to be absorbing the most you can out of the foods that you're already eating. Another hormone that's really important with the whole idea of nutrition is insulin, because insulin is the hormone that once we have eaten and there are sugars entering our bloodstream now, insulin tells the body, hey, you're fed. There's sugar in the bloodstream. Everybody, all you cells, grab this sugar and pull it in and put it into storage. So insulin is a hormone that directs our body to store the sugar that we just consumed. And imbalances with our glucose intake and our insulin can lead to all sorts of problems. So it's something to be really mindful of when you're eating. The microbiome's influence on nutrition, that's something that the microbes that live in our large intestine, in our colon, they're there to do a lot of things to help break down foods. They actually make B vitamins for us. They manufacture them for us, and we can absorb those in our bloodstream. But also even unlocking antioxidants out of fruits and vegetables is dependent on a good gut microbiome. Without them, we can't get those antioxidants from our foods in the same degree. So yeah, probiotics really important. So what has changed with the advent of agriculture, or, you know, things that before we shifted, before agriculture, people were really doing seasonal eating, right? It's just what was available. We didn't have agriculture to grow it, so we ate what was around. Now that's shifted, now that's changed. We're no longer eating seasonally. I think we've lost some information that helps our bodies to, you know, deal with our environment better. The tag here with nutrients in the 40s versus now. I don't know how many of you look at nutrition labels and nutrition data online, but, you know, you can search online to get information on things like, you know, my fitness tracker or, you know, different food facts. And the food tables, the US government, and I think it was the 1930s or 40s, they did a massive survey of foods, right? Our scientists got busy and they checked through the foods that we had and assessed them, evaluated for their vitamins, for their minerals, all of these things. And the food tables were created in that era. Well, I think a lot of you are old enough to understand our agriculture has changed dramatically. My dad grew up on a farm, and the practices, you know, he was born in 1946, and the way that they did farming when he was young changed throughout his lifetime. So by the time he left the farm, they were growing things very, very differently, right? The inputs were different. They were using, you know, different kind of herbicides and pesticides. They were growing monocultures. Anyway, so things have really changed in agriculture just since the 1940s. And now if you were to take some of the foods like broccoli, if you look at the nutrition data tables and then actually compare what's in the broccoli now, they're really depleted of those nutrients. And that's because of our farming practices. If we're not doing sustainable farming practices, we're just really robbing the soils of their nutrients. Minerals get into our foods because they are initially in the soil. So if the minerals are not in the soil, they're not going to get into the food. So you're not going to be getting that. So again, you know, this comes into the idea of supplementation. And that is, you know, even if you're eating a really well-rounded, well-balanced diet, and you think you're getting all the nutrients you want, if you're getting mostly, you know, the standard big agri foods these days, they don't have those nutrients in them. So this is where supplementation come in handy. Or
Dr. Lauri,
yes.
We're going to say that again, because so many people say, I eat really well, I don't need to spend money on supplements. And what you just said, I don't want anybody in here to miss it, is the fact of the matter is the soil has changed. The farming practices have changed, is what you're saying. And this is where, and sometimes, you know, we're trying to cut calories because we're trying to lose weight. Perhaps we're not eating well-rounded. All these reasons is reason to make sure that we are supplementing to get our essential vitamins, essential minerals, essential proteins or amino acids. These essentials are called essentials because they're building blocks. We have to have them. And if we're not getting it in our diet, which from what I understand and what science is telling us, it is almost impossible to get all your essentials, what your body needs as fuel to build it, to reverse aging, to be able to even keep up with aging, to keep up with our immune system, to keep up with what we need to build, requires supplementation, or somebody's got to be so darn good at what they're doing, growing their own food and monitoring everything that we have to have if you want to be your healthiest. So that's worthy of saying once again, apologize for interrupting, but I didn't want that one slide by because they're called essentials and we're just not getting it out in the food today. Thank you.
I love it. Yes, absolutely true. And yeah, if you are looking for foods that are grown in more sustainable ways, you can look for things that are, biodynamically farmed or sustainably farmed, or even restorative farming. There are a lot of buzzwords these days. You're going to find those things maybe at farmers market or specialty shops. It's difficult. You really have to go out of your way to find those food sources. Or, if you are like me and you love home gardening, you can grow, some things at home, but I certainly can't provide for the bulk of my diet from my home garden. So I really do rely on some supplements for the nutrients that I'm not getting from my foods too. Organically grown, that is something, again, the reason you would want that is when their foods are organically grown, again, they're on soils that are more likely than not being regenerated with nutrients. They're also not going to have pesticides and herbicides sprayed on them. So that's going to make that better for you. Also, it's better for the soil because when we're putting pesticides on our soils, it not only is harming, the residue stuck on the plants is hurting us, but those pesticides are going into our soils. And the microbes that live in the soil are devastated by that. Those microbes that live in the soil they're little workers, they're like worker bees under the soil that push nutrients into the roots of the plants that we're growing. So again, not organically grown, the pesticides are harming the soil, which is harming the plants, which is harming our nutrition. So the best you can by organically grown. Now, there are some guides, I neglected to put it on here for you, but there's a group called the Environmental Working Group, and it is a watchdog group. They're fantastic. They have a guide that they publish every year, and it's called The Dirty Dozen and The Clean 15. So what they do is they evaluate produce, they pull produce off the shelves and they take it back to the lab and they look at it and see which are the most heavy with residues of herbicides and pesticides and harmful things. And the ones that are the worst offenders, those are the dirty dozen. And so those plants, or those produce items, when you see those on the list, you want to make sure you purchase those organic. And then the clean 15 is on the other end of the spectrum. Those were the cleanest 15 foods. And so those, if you know that those are fine, even in like big agra, you can save a little bit of money and buy those just standard grown and not spend the money on the organic. So knowing how to wisely spend your money can also help. Again, that's called the Environmental Working Group. And you can get the Dirty Dozen Clean 15 list either as an app that you can have on your phone or a printable. But again, they update it every year, so you keep the most up-to-date information. I'm not going to go too much into GMOs, but for me, the biggest problem with genetically modified organisms is the reason they modify is so that the plant can survive being inundated with chemicals, right? So Roundup is a really awful chemical called glyphosate is the term. And it is a persistent pollutant in our world. It's ubiquitous. It is everywhere now. But the more we can limit our exposure to it, the better, because it messes with our mitochondria, right? That's the little powerhouses of our cells. So creating energies on a cellular level is interfered with by this stuff. So we want to stay away from it as much as we can. And GMO foods like corns, they are engineered to withstand Roundup so that the plant can survive it. Anyway, point being, this is something that I think when people have problem with wheat, a lot of people, I think they have a problem with wheat because the Roundup is sprayed onto the crops immediately before harvest. It's a way of desiccating and shriveling the plant up, so it's easier to harvest, right? It's great for their machinery. It's great for the big agri guys, but that plant just got sprayed with a bunch of nasty chemicals and it gets passed through all the processing. So how do we avoid that? Only organically grown wheat. So when you have a product that's got wheat in it, make sure it's organically grown and avoiding the GMOs. Okay. Here's just some information about how the agricultural revolution influenced population growth, in early humans. So before 10,000 years ago, in the advent of agriculture, the population growth was 0.001% per year. Slow, low population growth. At that time, before agriculture 10 years ago, maybe 5 to 10 million humans was the estimate. Then we started growing crops. We stayed put, we stayed in place, we stopped being nomadic and stayed in place and made friends with these crops. We became sedentary. Women became fatter, which is not to insult less. It's just to say a well-nourished woman is more likely to survive a pregnancy and to have a viable pregnancy. So we, became fatter, we had more births, and by the early agricultural period, the population rate had jumped to 100 times what it previously had been. And by the 1st century BCE, the world population reached 300 million, right? So even from 10 million to 300 million, it was just a huge jump when we added these grains. Essentially, it's what we're talking about, agriculture being growing plants. This is just a fun graphic I want you to see. That little green thing that's on top there, it's got, like 5 or 6 little segments. That is teosinte, and that is the original grass that humans saw and started cultivating and changed it and changed it and changed it and hybridized it. And over time, that little plant turned into the modern domesticated corn. So all corn came from that little guy. So you can see, that the blue corn in the background there, all those kernels, just clustered together. That was just from humans adapting. So when we talk sometimes about genetic modifications, this is a genetic modification, but it's not through engineering and science. This is just humans hybridizing. So in this way, this sort of genetic modification is not harmful. But again, it's just, you can see how the modern foods we eat are just nothing like those in the natural world. So even when we're eating what we would say are natural foods now, they're very different from what our early ancestors had. Lots of, different levels of starch and whatnot. What did this change with our health? There's a Native American burial site in Illinois. It's called Dixon Mounds. And it's one of the early sites where humans settled down, Native Americans settled down here over 12,000 years ago and started developing agriculture. And so they actually have burial sites from that long, long ago period up until about 1,000 years CE. And those burial sites show the difference in humans from the early times before agriculture through the advent of agriculture. So what did we see? What changed? Humans reduced in height when they started having a lot of grains in their diet. Their problems with their teeth, different, their enamel didn't form as well. Tooth decay was more common. Iron deficiency anemia, because iron is mainly in animal foods. And when we displace animal foods with grains, we end up with some types of anemia. Bone lesions, degenerative conditions of your spine, metabolic diseases like obesity and diabetes. Because of the increased population, we could all be crowded closer together, more parasitic and infectious diseases. So you can think like there's another example of that in our modern world, and that's cattle. We raise cattle now in these contained animal feeding operations, or CAFOs we call them. And when we have to crowd all those animals close together, we have to douse them with antibiotics and other hormones and things like that, because living close together is just not healthy for them, and they get a lot more diseases. And the same thing happened to humans. When we started living closer together, diseases rose. And then a 27% drop in life expectancy in humans when they switched from what was their native diet to something that had a lot more grains and starches in it. So
let's pause for a second, because a 27% drop in life expectancy when more grains were being brought in versus a diet that was higher in the meats and the fats. Is that correct?
yeah,
Yes.
yes.
And so those of us that are, or those that are trying to say that the meats are bad, and getting into the plant and the grains is not necessarily the case. We see science behind this that in major history for a long time of where the introduction of grains have caused harm.
Right, because, you know, again, Homo sapiens sapiens, 200,000 years on the earth, only 10,000 years of this have we been dealing with grains. It's just not natural to the human diet, and it changed us. But, you know, it was something that allowed a lot more people to live, right? You know, we got a lot more calorie energy into people, and so they could survive. It wasn't as healthy survival because you said, you know, animal meats and fats, it's got the protein and fats, but those fats aren't just a macronutrient. It's not just an energy source. Fats contain all the minerals and all of the vitamins, or not all of them, but the fat soluble nutrients, vitamins A, D, E, and K, are in those animal fats. And so we got a lot of nutrients from the fat too, not just energy from fat.
Thank you.
But so then why this trade-off, right? Why do humans stick with this if it wasn't actually making us healthier? Well, because those agricultural products are feel-good foods, right? Addictive drugs have either opioid or dopaminergic effects, and those are rewards for our brain. Because those things, those opioids, those dopamine enhancing foods in early humans, our brains rewarded us when we ate things like those darn little crab apples, right? That little crab apple wasn't that sweet, but it had enough sugar in it that it made your brain happy, and we got rewarded for eating it. And so fat, there was a similar thing too. Fat contained, again, all those wonderful nutrients that we need and a lot of energy density per gram of fat. And fat also had a salty characteristic to it. So when our brains encountered salty taste and fat, they got a big dopamine reward, because again, it was encouraging early humans, this is the kind of food you want to eat, seek this food out, right? So those things are built into our brain, those reward systems. But unfortunately, there are, you know, items in the foods, cereal grains and milk products that mimic those, right? There's some opioids and some dopaminergic effects to those foods, and they make our brains happy, right? So if you eat some, you know, frosted flakes with milk, boy, is your brain going to be just thrilled with that. And you get lots of reward for doing that. And the way that we eat currently and the way we feed our little kids, their normal intake of cereals and milk is enough of these opioids to really alter their moods. Why would we do it? Again, because we have a food industry that promotes that, right? We've got a food industry, the third item on the panel here, Food Incorporated, right? That's knowing that our brains reward us for eating salty and crunchy and fatty and certain characteristics of foods. Food companies engineer that into their foods so that there's more density of that stuff, and it keeps us hooked on it. It actually creates cravings. There's literally addiction in the brain with these things, and it creates withdrawal symptoms. So these foods, early humans just adopted them because we could keep more people alive by having grains, but now they're just something that our brains have become addicted to. And I mean, anybody who's tried eating, you know, grains and dairy products, those are recommendations that a lot of either naturopaths or dietitians or, you know, health advocates will recommend staying away from those foods. And people will always just reflect back how incredibly difficult that is. And it is because it's built into your brain to be addicted to those types of foods. All right, so away from agriculture and how it's shifted and changed things, I'm just going to briefly hit on some specific nutrients. Again, I'll talk not a lot about supplements here, but on my website for Living Wellness Medical Center, I've got a whole talk I did about supplements. how to choose supplements, what you need from supplementation. And that's something I love to do with my patients is, some people come to me with just a bag full of supplements, and I ask them, bring them to your first visit, and we're going to look at them and see what you need. So that's something I love to help people with. And just know, I'm not going to do a lot of that today, but I have a whole webinar all about how to choose a supplement for these. But what do we want? Protein. When we're eating proteins, really what we're after in there is the amino acids. The amino acids in proteins, they vary per protein source, right? Like an egg has a certain profile of amino acids, and beef will have another certain profile of amino acids, et cetera. So different sources provide different amino acids, especially when it comes to plant proteins. It really varies the different amino acids contained there. That's why sometimes people do food combining, because you can have rice and you can have beans, and together those two foods will have all the amino acids that you would find normally in an animal food. So anyway, proteins deliver the amino acids to us. And the important tissues there, your lean body tissues like your muscles, but your neurotransmitters, right? The chemical messengers that send signals all around your body through your brain and elsewhere. Amino acids are part of that. So, a lot of times we have a deficiency in certain neurotransmitters that leads to depression, or it creates anxiety, food cravings, all sorts of things happen when our neurotransmitters are out of balance, insomnia, all kinds of stuff. So protein is the source of the amino acids that give us those neurotransmitters. Minerals, like I said, those are things that are really depleted in our modern foods because the minerals aren't in the soil. But minerals are very important for bones, the strength of our bones. We have a collagen matrix, and then minerals are embedded within that, and that makes our bones strong. They act as cofactors in chemical reactions. And when we have good minerals coming in through our diet, they compete with toxic metals that might otherwise be present. And so if you have good mineral status, you're not going to have as much toxic metal absorption into your body. Vitamins act as cofactors in chemical reactions. So all the processing that our body needs to do, we need these elements to help us to do them efficiently. Antioxidants are things that help protect our DNA from damage through oxidation. They're antioxidant, so they work against oxidation. And oxidation damages our DNA, create mutations. Oxidation can cause deterioration of cell membranes. It can really damage our bodies. So antioxidants are a really important thing to get in through our diets. And again, it requires an adequate microbiome or good gut bacteria. Here we go, essential nutrients. So now for you to see all the nutrients that are essential, things that aren't on this list, you may think of some nutrients that aren't on here, right? So we're looking at vitamins. I say, oh, there's inositol is not on there. Well, that's because our body can make that nutrient, right? Choline is on here as essential, but it is conditionally essential. Really, we can make a little bit of choline in our body, but not enough to keep us healthy. So essential nutrients mean we have to eat these through foods. We can't make them within our own bodies. So just take a look at all those things that we have to get from our foods. This is why a wide variety and nutrient dense foods are important, because we got a lot of things we got to cram in other than the macros. People think of the carbohydrates and proteins and fats, but don't neglect paying attention to all of the actual essential micronutrients that you need. Those are highly important for your body to function well. Some ways that our ancestors preserved food were really beneficial for preserving nutrients within them. Storage underground, why it's just cold storage. We can still do that today. Drying, well, we can still do that today. Freezing, fermenting. These are things we can still do with food preservation. Now, heat processing and canning was not done by our early ancestors, and it significantly depletes nutrients from those foods. So, I mean, while it's good in a pinch, and you might need to do that, maybe again, like my dad grew up with a root cellar on his family farm. They had to put up preserves to get through winter, but they're not as nutrient rich as if they're fresh foods, right? Or even if they're frozen. Freezing is a lot better for nutrient preservation. And fermenting actually has a bonus of increasing nutrient availability and providing probiotics. So these are foods that in all sorts of native populations, there were fermented foods. They all had some type, right? Fermented fish with Eskimos, fermented dairy in the Alps, sourdough. So these are food preservation techniques that'll still help us to keep the most nutrient density in the food.
Which is, I'm going to just quickly interrupt because I think under some of the essentials, it's not listed there, but the probiotics, we need to have that to break down our food. You talked a little bit earlier about good digestion and how important it is to get the nutrients out, and that fermenting that takes place and the probiotics that are there. If we're not getting it through fermentation and through the types of foods, that's another form of supplementation of the probiotics of, when people wonder, should I take one or should I not?
Yep.
It's because it is essential to help break down.
It for sure is. So something about probiotics, they're microbes from the soil. That's where they come from in the first place, right? Well, initially, when we're born, our gut is sterile, right? A newborn human has a sterile gut. Their intestines have no bacteria in there. It's through breastfeeding that the probiotics are passed along from the mother, right? So even just skin to skin contact, with the baby's mouth on the nipple, there's some transmission, but also through the milk, there's transmission. So probiotics are seeded into a baby's gut by coming through the mother. Now, how does mom get them? The microbes in the soil. So let's think about, I think you all know sauerkraut, that's a fermented food. And sauerkraut, if you just take a head of cabbage and chop it up, put some salt in there to help break it down and liquefy things, put a lid on it, it's going to ferment. Why? Because the cabbage is covered in microbes from the soil that it grew in. And those microbes, you don't have to add microbes to make sauerkraut. You just chop up the cabbage and it's there. So it's the soil microbes that ferment the food down and give us the wonderful flavor and the sour and the tart, but also it's growing those microbes and increasing their population. So when we eat them, they get into our bodies. For something to be called a probiotic, it does have to meet some characteristics. WHO, World Health Organization, has a definition here, and it's kind of a big one. My simple definition is this: microbes that survive gastrointestinal transit to the large intestine, populate the colon, and confer a benefit to the host. So in that way, one, it has to be something that once you swallow it, your acid in your stomach isn't going to kill them. The bile in your small intestine isn't going to kill them. They've got to get all the way down to your large intestine and then survive there. They're going to populate. Another term for large intestine is colon. It's one and the same. So your colon is where all those wonderful bacteria live. That's their home. And they do, like I said, a lot of good things. They help us break open the antioxidants. They help us to make B vitamins. There's a lot of different, they make different, just different nutrients for us. I don't want to get too in the weeds, but organic acids and things. So that's probiotics. Now, of course, you can take them, you can supplement them. I just wanted to highlight with fermented foods, kombucha is not a probiotic containing food. If you purchase a commercial kombucha, on the bottle, it would say with probiotics because they added them. It's added to the kombucha before it's delivered to you. If you make kombucha at home, there are no probiotics in that. It's a fermented food with some good health benefits and some nice nutrients, but you're not getting probiotic bacteria because what's in that doesn't survive your gastric acid and get to the large intestine, okay? Then the other really important thing to know about probiotics is you can take a supplement of it, sure. If you're not eating fermented foods, then you're not getting them in your diet and you're gonna need to take a supplement of it. But that's not the end of the story because yes, you take, again, if you choose a really good probiotic supplement, they're going to be enterically coated or spore form or in some way, you need to know that probiotic is going to survive until it gets to your large intestine. Once it's there though, and they're, living, you need to foster their growth. You can't just, survive on taking probiotics every day. I mean, you could, but that's kind of a waste of your money because once you get a good population of the bacteria in there, eating fermentable fibers are what is going to keep them alive, right? And again, fiber is a huge topic I love to talk about. It's so important and it's so missing in our standard American diet. That's something I have a whole webinar again just on dietary fiber. So I can tell you all the ins and outs of why that's so important if you want to go look at my webinars. But dietary fiber for fostering probiotics is one of the important uses of that nutrient. Okay. All right, so here are some micronutrients, again, in hunter-gatherer diets versus our current intakes. You can see the nutrients here on the left, what the amount is in a hunter-gatherer diet, and then the RDA, the Food and Drug Administration sets the RDA for us, but it's really not optimal intake for promoting health. It's just what's needed for us not to present with some deficiencies or some diseases of deficiency. So the RDA even is not promoting the optimal intake for people. But if you look at the RDA compared to current intakes, sadly, our current intakes of a lot of things are even well below the RDA, just far below what hunter-gatherer diets provided. I highlighted in green the fiber just to make my points again. Dietary fiber is so important for fostering the health of our gut, the health of our gut bacteria, that microbiome. In early human diets and people who still live this way, hunter-gatherers get 100 to 150 grams of dietary fiber every day. Most Americans get between 12 and 16 grams of fiber a day. And the RDA is paltry at only recommending 20 to 35. So really, to achieve the most benefits, your dietary fiber intake should be much higher than what the basic RDA is. And I'm assuming because, you know, most of us are from populations of humans that we've mixed around the world, right? So you're not probably a Maasai warrior. So you don't need to eat just milk and blood and meat, right? You probably need a more well-rounded diet that includes things with more vegetation in it. And dietary fiber is a great thing to focus on. One, you know, because it gives us a lot of benefits for our gut microbiome, but also the more fiber that's in your diet, necessarily the less simple sugars you have, because complex carbohydrates have fiber, and eating more of them will displace more of the simple sugars in our diet. So that's just healthier.
So Dr. Lauri, that chart that you have up is, it appears to be all the essentials, vitamins, some essential vitamins and minerals that are in here that are required in our current diet today. And if I walked away with this, you're just showing how much more they used to get. And even though the RDA you may think that you're getting enough, it truly still isn't enough.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. There are different ways that the government has presented these. You know, there's an RDA, which is kind of just a recommended dietary allowance. Then there's an upper intake level. So they've also identified, you know, there's some nutrients you can take too much of. There are a few nutrients they've established an optimal intake for, but not for everything. But anyway, just if you know, the RDA it's okay to prevent disease states, but it's not really optimum functioning. Here are some things, you know, you talked about people trying to lose weight. So I also like to really make sure people understand that lipids or fats are so vital for our brain's health. We can't eat a really low fat diet and expect your brain to be optimized or healthy. Your brain contains more lipid than any other organ. Phospholipids in particular are about 67% of your brain's weight. So that's phospholipid is an example is that lecithin, which some people use as a dietary aid, but it's really high like in egg yolks, very high in lecithin. But phospholipids are the predominant fat that's in our brains. There's also a really high amount of cholesterol. So I try to speak to my aging patients about this. Actually, having really low cholesterol levels as we age is not terribly healthy for us because our brain is dependent on cholesterol to build its cells out of. So we need good cholesterol. This fatty acid, this docosahexaenoic acid, DHA, that's that omega-3 fatty acid I told you is so important for brain health, that it was the dividing line between us and early primates. We have more of this in our brains, which allowed our brains to be bigger. This is something that's really important for pregnant women and nursing mothers to intake in high amounts, because it's 40% of the omega-3s or the polyunsaturated fatty acids in our brain are the DHA, and 60% of those fats in our retina are DHA. And your retina, I don't know if you know this, but your eyeballs, your eyes are an extension of your brain. So in fetal development, the brain starts to develop, and then the eyes come on these little stalks out the front of the brain. And so they're actually connected, and they really relate to each other in their health. And so there's a lot of those fatty acids in your retina. 50% of the neurons, cell membranes are that DHA. Anyway, really vital that you eat healthy fats. Most of these things, again, phospholipids can be gotten through eggs. Cholesterol can be gotten through eggs. The DHA can be gotten through, eating fish or fish oils. So if you're a vegan and you can't consume those foods, then you need to find a way to supplement to make sure you're getting everything you need for your brain health. Myelin sheath, what is that? So every nerve that's running through your body, it's just like an electrical cord that has that, like, they have the plastic insulation coating of an electrical cord. Your nerve has this sheath around it called myelin. And that myelin sheath is this fatty coating. And 70% of it is fat anyways. There's a little protein, but most of that sheath is fat. Most of that is oleic acid, which is found really high in olive oils. So that's another great source of brain health and nervous system health. So
I'm
these
so
are
thankful that you covered that again. There's that olive oil again, and how important it is. And even though they don't call these omegas as classified, I guess, as essential, it really is essential.
Yeah, it really is.
Yes, and I want to just let you know that we're got about 10 minutes remaining for the end.
I'm getting close to the end.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and your brain has a lot of energy needs. I just threw this in there because I think a lot of people don't know that even when you're just sitting at rest, your resting metabolism, doing nothing, your brain is consuming 20 to 25% of the calories that are being burned. Your brain is a really heavy actor, right? It uses a lot of energy. It consumes 2/3 of all the glucose that's used in your body, right? So your brain needs a lot of fuel. And people will say, oh gosh, in the afternoon, I get really tired and lethargic. And well, have you eaten enough today? Did you eat enough at lunch? Are you getting the fuel to your brain? Your brain is using a lot of energy. Again, since the beginning, I said there's no one size fits all human diet. There's not. So I'm going to give you just some kind of guidelines and resources for where you can find information about nutrition too. The Mediterranean diet is a really popular framework because there's been, dozens of studies, lots and lots of scientific trials studying the Mediterranean diet because it's really been shown to be exceedingly helpful for heart health, for preventing strokes and heart attacks and all sorts of things. So what is it about the Mediterranean diet that's so great? Well, we know the foods that are included are fatty, oily ocean fish 3 times a week. They have the only grains they really would consume in this diet would be things like whole grain, like bulgur wheat, which is just wheat that's soaked and cracked. And then, you make it into a salad with lots of like tabbouleh, right? With lots of parsley, which is wonderful greens. So they're greens, they're grains, but not refined grains. There's also very lean, like feta cheese, so lean dairy. Anyway, there's a lot of great foods in the Mediterranean diet. But if you stop your focus at the foods that are in the Mediterranean diet, you lose a lot of the reality of what makes that diet, or those people that they originally studied in the Mediterranean who are so healthy and live to be, in their 80s and 90s in this really healthy way. Well, we pull the diet into our American lifestyles. We don't have the same benefits. And that's because it was a lifestyle as well as the diet. It was the fact that these people, they were Sardinians, right? They lived on a little island and they had to walk everywhere that they went. And they lived in family groupings where there were multi-generational family housing. People had siestas during the day. It was the way that they moved their bodies, the way that they lived in communion with others that also made, a lot of the heart health benefits. So don't think that just eating good nutrients and a healthy diet is all there is to it. Because when we look at these diets, like the Okinawans also, very long living, it's not just the foods, it's also their lifestyle. If you want to find some great resources, I'm not going to click all these links because we don't have time, but I have some links here and I'll have them shared with you all so you can click and look at all these different websites. This one, examine.com, I love it because if you want to know about a certain nutrient, maybe you've heard some buzz about something and you want to know, is there evidence to back up that claim about that nutrient being good for me? That is a website that reviews scientific studies, and it goes through them and it evaluates which ones are better and which ones are worse. And it gives you a breakdown of, the evidence that we have for the health of certain nutrients. So I just love that. There's so much garbage out there in the world. There's so much misinformation. There are so many websites that are there to sell you a product, that they're going to tell you about a nutrient or something, but it's not really for your information, just to sell you something. So that's a good website just to get the facts without the sales pitch. Now, other sources of information, the Anti-Angiogenesis Foundation, it is particularly about foods to eat to help with preventing cancer. Wall's protocol, Dr. Terry Walls, she developed this protocol. She herself had a neurological disorder, I believe it was MS, and she developed this protocol of how to eat to reverse her neurological disorder. She went from being confined to a wheelchair to being able-bodied again. So she's got a great protocol, some healthy ideas in there. And then the Weston Price Foundation, just another organization that really talk about the importance of those healthy animal foods in our diet, and why cholesterol wasn't the evil that we had always we'd been told it was. One little thing I'm going to throw in there: cholesterol. Why did we think it was bad? Well, because again, 1940s, there was some scientific trials done where they fed cholesterol to rabbits. Those rabbits developed heart disease, and so then they extrapolated that to humans. Well, rabbits are herbivores. They're not omnivores. They wouldn't have cholesterol in their native diet. So of course it hurt them. Humans are omnivores. Eating cholesterol is not harmful to us. We have to be careful, again, of what study you're looking at and how was it tested? Because all those years that we were told to avoid cholesterol was because of a study done on rabbits. And now we've had so much scientific evidence in the meantime to show us that that was bogus, that eating cholesterol will not hurt you.
Thank you.
Okay. I do want to encourage you to eat fish, right? Seafood, important, but there can be some nasty stuff with fish. You can get a lot of mercury depending on the waters that those fish were harvested from. It can be very polluted waters with, oh gosh, other than mercury, there's lots of other like persistent pollutants in our water supply. So anyway, there's a guide here for which fish will have the best benefit with the least amount of mercury. There's a guide for sustainability if you care about that, right? There are some fish that you should eat farmed and some you should have wild caught, and the sustainability guide will tell you that. And then both of those websites recommend the seafoodwatch.org, so you can get information there just about seafood that's going to be healthier for you and the planet.
And I'll put some of these links and information she's talking about, guys, on our summary for the next store page, okay?
Thank you so much. All right, I would love for people to, I put those there for you all to have, so hopefully you can avail yourselves of them. Here are just some modern plant foods that are similar to hunter-gatherer foods. So if you wanted some ideas of, what are some plant foods that I should bring in that might be healthier, great. These are just some of those ideas. And then finally, with your generalized daily diet, right? I'm not going to give you a one-size-fits-all human diet, but just general ideas using the hunter-gatherer proportions for a 2,000 calorie a day diet. I am a moderately active woman. My calorie intake should be around 2,000 calories a day. So this would be appropriate for me. I'm about 130 pounds. I'm 50 years old. It varies depending on your height, your weight, and your age, what your calorie needs are. But, average person, 2,000 calories a day, you would want to have about 16 ounces of a combination of animal foods, animal proteins. A 4-ounce serving of fruit is about a half a cup, 4 ounces, and 9 servings a day of fruits is what our hunter-gatherer ancestors ate, right? And that's whole fruit. That is not juicing. Please do not juice your fruits to get the nutrients out of them. It's just a sugar rush to your system. But eating fruits, whole fruits, maybe cooked, maybe raw, but 9 servings a day of fruits. Does anyone here do that? It's crazy, but that would be great if you could. Other things, vegetables, tubers, roots, leaves, all of those are here in the different proportions that you would want. the important thing I want, I put the picture here, the graphic, because I want you to understand, eat the rainbow. When you're choosing what plant foods to eat, getting your pigments from those foods, the pigments are the antioxidants, right? There are certain antioxidants that come along with the red pigment. There are other antioxidants that come along with orange and yellow pigment. Another that goes along with green, and then further antioxidants that are in blue and purple. So in those 4 categories, red, orange, yellow, green, and blue, purple, try to eat all of those colors every day, a couple servings of each one every day, to get all those antioxidants that would protect you against cancer. Other things that are great are herbs and spices and teas, right? Lots of other wonderful plant foods high in those aromatic compounds like we have in herbs and spices. Again, those are information that our body uses when we have certain herbs and spices. We think of herbal medicine. There's information passed through those herbs that can direct our body and help balance it. So when you're eating, be really generous with herbs and spices and even teas. They've got great properties for you. Again, encouraging fermented foods, legumes, bean, peas, lentils, peanuts, things like that. Those are great sources of fiber. They're really the top sources for me of fiber, because most of my patients aren't going to eat this many fruits, and they're not going to eat this much vegetation. And if they can't, then another really great way to get their dietary fiber in is through legumes. So nut butters, things like that are great sources of fiber. And then finally, if you're trying to be the most nutrient dense, brassica or cruciferous vegetables are fantastic. They have a lot of anti-cancer properties to them. And those are things, all the things in that family are, cabbage and kale and mustard greens and arugula. All of those are in that same family. All right. So that is everything I had. I can't believe I just
Awesome.
my
Yeah, that was like spot on. We're at 8 o'clock, and I know that a couple of questions that had come in beforehand were both on supplementation and hoping that you might cover that. And I have brought some of my supplementations. It's not a recommendations, but it's just more or less piggybacking on what you had to say in regards to making sure we get our essential vitamins, essential amino acids that comes with our proteins, our essential omegas, which were those oils, and our essential minerals that can come in oftentimes in a multivitamin form. That those are just, and then of course, vitamin D, they call it a vitamin, it's a hormone, but yes, we get a lot of it in our sunshine here, but many of us need to be able to also have that in a supplementation form also. So there are those essentials. People oftentimes are saying, no, I'm eating plenty, but it is so difficult to get it out of the food, as I had mentioned earlier. But even for me, I'm in that time restriction window, and I spend a lot of consume a lot of my calories and my essentials in the workouts that I do. A lot of us around here are very, very active. It's so difficult to be able to continue to keep up with the machine and the fuels that it's required. And so, I don't sell any supplementations, but I sell the concepts that I could not live, I think, without my supplementations, and actually have been there, because I have been void with a dietary digestion that wasn't working properly. As you had said before, it's so important to be able to have our digestion working properly, even if we're consuming and it's not. So one of the essentials that I also take is the probiotics, to be able to do that, both in fermented foods and in a purchase form. I choose to do Seed. It's a brand. There's many different brands of probiotics, but that's one that I just happen to take.
Do you know, I've evaluated that one before for patients who brought it in, but I don't remember. Is that one in spore form?
This is an amazing, they make the probiotics for NASA, for the astronauts. They also make it for bees. They make it for many different animals. It's a scientific, lot of science behind this particular company called Seed. And I had switched at one point to something else, bar none. My body liked this particular brand. So that's one that I like and tend to reference to people. When it comes down to the omegas, the essential oils and that our brain has to have, that our body has to have, I tend to buy from a reputable company called Biotics. And Biotics is where I get my omegas beyond the fish. And I am a fanatic for fresh pressed olive oil. I'll actually put it on hard-boiled eggs, or I'll put it on toast to be able to get that olive oil component that you emphasized is so important. And so, but in addition to that, I take the Biotics omegas because
it's a great brand. It really does matter the brands too. So
yes.
if you don't know how to choose a supplement yourself, let somebody like myself or Pamela guide you on that, because there's so much advertising online, and they will push their product as being the latest and greatest and best thing ever, but it may not be true. So
yes.
the better brands, like the one she's mentioning, generally those really good brands are available through a doctor's office. You have to purchase them through a medical provider or directly on that website for that manufacturer. If you find it on Amazon or third party online, they are likely counterfeit products.
Through that.
Because they're controlled. Like those really good brands don't just sell anywhere because
right.
They have a reputation. So just be mindful in purchasing supplements.
Yes. And Dr. Lauri, you have a where you can order through Full Script.
Yeah.
And Full Script carries Biotics as well. Here's another one by Biotics. This is where I get a lot of the extra protein. This is amino sport. And this one is on my, I absolutely take this. It's got the essentials and then some. And I do, as most of you guys know, a lot of physical activity. I'm not a heavy meat eater. But it's essential for building muscle and for building everything else. You've got to have those proteins. And if you're not able to consume enough to be able to supplement with something like that, some people do it through protein shakes. I tend to be able to put it in my pill case to make sure that I'm getting it. In addition to vitamins and minerals, again with Biotics, is they have a brand here that is Pro Multi Plus. In addition to this Pro Multi Plus, at night, I take their version of magnesium. Most people are deficient in magnesium, and it needs to be taken at night because it's an automatic muscle relaxer, neurological relaxer. In fact, it's a big tool in autism and other neurological dysfunctions, is to make sure that your magnesium input is enough.
Can I say something about magnesium?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so it's the #1 mineral deficiency in Americans. It's in foods that we don't eat that much. It's predominantly in leafy green vegetables. It's high in chlorophyll, so in greens. It's also in nuts and seeds, which again, we don't eat enough of those. And the form really does matter. When you're looking for a magnesium form, some magnesiums are good stool softeners and some are good muscle relaxers. And they really vary. It's all depending on how much your body absorbs the magnesium out of the supplement. So be careful, if you need a magnesium because you've got muscle tension or you can't relax or sleep well, you need a specific type of magnesium, not the stuff you're going to find on the shelf at Walgreens.
Right. And the one that's with Biotics is the right one for the neurological support and wellness, not for loosening of stools. Or however, I do believe if you had way too much, you're probably still going to have loose stools when it comes down to magnesium, because it is relax everything. And then lastly, I also choose a brand called Metagenics as another really good company. And I just happen to like their D3 algae, but there's other Ds, as well as the biotic form also had some vitamin D in it as well. And those are as a basis, what I say to everybody is yes, we start refining and learning these things that Dr. Lauri is talking about. And as we get better and better of understanding our nutrition, at the bare minimum, to help make sure that you're getting those essential covered is what I take there. pretty much covers those essentials. And so that's for those of you that were asking. And if you have some other questions, I'm going to be watching for your hands to be raised.
And I just want to make kind of one last point. You know, as a naturopathic doctor, I'm just trying to impart to you all the ideas that if you have questions about nutrition, or should I eat this and should I eat that, or what's good, is this, you know, beneficial or not? If you always just kind of think back to what I told you about our early human ancestors and how they ate and how the human organism is, you know, best served on this planet, it's you can just think back to, gosh, could a caveman have eaten this? And if not, then it's probably not something that's great for you, right? If it's super refined and processed, maybe even if it's touted as a superfood, might not be that super for you. So just always going back to basics when you have questions about nutrition is, you know, could my early human ancestors have eaten this?
Thank you for that. So you're welcome to either raise your hand, I can call on you, or you're welcome to unmute yourself and just start with your question. Oh, there we go, Dawn, you got your hand up. Let's go for it, girl. Unmute you. I'm going to ask you to unmute there. And let me give you.
Okay.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
It's kind of breaking up.
The question I'm going to ask is for someone that couldn't ask. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're just kind of breaking up.
Yeah, you guys have been breaking up too when you were talking, so I don't know.
I think it's your internet connection.
Okay. Can you hear me okay now?
Good. Talk slow. That helped.
Okay. I do not eat red meat, but I eat a lot of chicken. So if I'm not getting enough of that meat in my diet, can the supplements I take work just as much to balance it out?
Yeah.
Is chicken good to eat?
You know, I also, I married a guy who doesn't eat mammals. So, and my diet has not had any mammals in it for at least 10 years. We mostly eat poultry and fish as well. So I hear you there. Sometimes I think maybe I should just have some beef once in a while just to get a little bit of it in. But the things that you can get or that you would get more of from like a beef or elk or something, there's something called conjugated linoleic acid, or CLA, and that's a really important fatty acid that's not high in a lot of other foods other than beef. So you can always do a supplementation of that.
Okay.
Yeah, there's not a really direct way to replace.
That was a really good question, Dawn, because you're right. And some people just plain out don't care for a red meat, or because it is higher in cholesterol and they're watching their numbers. So thank you for asking that. So again, the recommendation would be, if no red meat, maybe you might want to supplement with CLA.
Yeah.
Okay, I wrote that down.
Awesome. Okay.
And I have one more, actually. I don't eat enough fruit. I've been told I should eat fruit, and I started eating an apple a day. I don't really eat any fruits. I guess because it's the sugar content that they have in fruit. I really get my sugar that I'm putting in my body, whether it's natural or not. So I don't.
We're having a hard time hearing you, Dawn. It keeps breaking up, but if I understood correctly, you're concerned about maybe not consuming enough fruit. Dr. Lauri, can you answer what she's trying to ask there that's what's breaking up?
Sure. Yeah. So if it's that you don't eat enough fruits in your diet because you're concerned with the sugar content, I would say you can release that fear, because the sugar that we want to avoid in our diet are simple sugars, right? So fruit juice would be a simple sugar. You want to stay away from that because it really quickly rushes into your bloodstream and spikes your insulin. So fruit juice, not so much. Whole fruit, so nature devised, they put the poison with the cure, right? The sugar, which we don't want, is also bound up and wrapped in a big package of dietary fiber. So an apple, apple juice, don't drink it, but an apple itself eat an apple because it takes time to chew the apple. Each bite takes time to process. So eating a piece of fruit whole is great. You're not going to spike your sugar that way. So that's one way. But if you can't eat fruit, you don't enjoy it, you're really not getting it in your environment, you can't, there are different greens and berries, powders and things that you can use as a supplement. It's not the best substitute, but it's something that'll give you those antioxidants at least.
Yeah, that was a really good suggestion. And some of you may not understand of how the importance of, if you're going to eat the fruit, to be able to go, and you had mentioned about not juicing. That fiber is allowing it to, the sugar breaks down over time in our digestive tract, versus if we were to have a juice, it's bam, right in the stomach as a liquid sugar format, because there's no fiber slowing it down. And so that's the difference between juicing with fruit or drinking fruit juice, is it's very bad to be able to have that amount of sugar instantly hit your system. Whether you're diabetic or not doesn't matter. You just need to make sure that it's dispersed over time. And that's the value of the cure that you were talking about that comes along with nature, to be able to slow down the process with the fiber. All right, it looks like we got a question over there from Cindy and Bill. Go ahead, and I'm going to ask you to unmute. And there we go. You guys are good to go.
Okay, well, actually, what's a good source of fiber?
Oh, so many good sources of fiber. If you want just bang for your buck, like per serving, the most fiber, like, maybe you've got a small appetite, you're not eating a lot, you want to get the most fiber in. Legumes, beans, so legume is the family that encompasses beans, peas, and lentils, and peanuts are considered a legume. So peanut butter, peanuts, pinto beans, hummus, bean dip, those are easy ways to get it in. So per serving, so let's say, all right, the RDA, remember I said the RDA is not sufficient, but the RDA for dietary fiber for women is 30 grams a day. And a half a cup serving of oatmeal is 8 grams of fiber, or a half cup of pinto beans is 8 grams of fiber. So those are really going to get you a lot. Like if each meal you want 10 grams of fiber, a serving of beans, something like that, that works great. But the most bang for your buck is legumes. Then grains would have the next. So whole grains would have the next, per serving amount. Then vegetables and fruit. So vegetables and fruit, like a apple, let's say a, small tennis ball size apple has 1 gram of dietary fiber, 1 gram in a whole piece of fruit. So and people say, oh, I eat a salad every day, I'm getting tons of fiber. No, you're not. A salad with 1 cup of kale and 1 cup of spinach and 1 full tomato and 1 full carrot and 1 full celery stick, that's 5 grams of fiber. So you'd have to eat 6 of those a day to get your requirement, just to get the RDA, right? Does that answer your question?
That was a really good example, by the way, because a lot of us do think that if we're eating a lot of vegetables, we're getting our fiber. Yeah, and the importance of, in comparison, when we're trying to shoot for 10 grams per meal to be able to get our minimum fiber, yet the value of legumes. Yeah, thank you.
My trick there is when you have a salad, throw some peas on it, throw some nuts on it and some seeds, and throw some beans on top. Or every time, if I make a soup, I'm throwing beans in there. If I make a casserole, there's beans in there, right? I just sprinkle it into everything. Like lentils can go in a lot of stuff.
And just another question, the best supplement for turmeric, is it just to eat it raw?
Well, for turmeric, it's a tricky one. To get the curcuminoids out of it that you want, it's actually kind of difficult to break it out of the food and to absorb in our gut. So you need something that enhances the absorption. So if it's, we found out that turmeric was good because, why are all these people that eat curry so gosh darn healthy? And it's because curry is really high in turmeric, and it's cooked with ghee, which is a fat, right? It's a clarified butter. And that fat attaches to it and makes it more absorbable in your gut. So through foods, naturally, cooking it, it's natural way. That's how you do it. But to get it from a supplement, you need to have it either attached to a fatty acid where they've already put it together. There's a form that you can find in supplements. It's a brand name called Meriva, M-E-R-I-V-A. And Meriva is just a branded trademarked name for that phospholipid attached to the turmeric. It's very, very absorbable. Other forms you can find if you're getting a supplement, it would have either black pepper or they would call that piperine. So piperine or black pepper attached to that in a supplement also makes it like 100 times more absorbable. So if you just buy something that says turmeric and it doesn't have any other something added to it, you don't absorb that very well at all. So capsules of that won't get very far.
And you can also order fresh turmeric tubers right from Amazon. You get quite a bit for like $12. And you just have to make sure that you're cooking it. I add pepper when I put it in my stir fry or put it in my juice with this fresh turmeric. So that is the absorbability where it actually will take on that turmeric.
Yeah, you can buy, you know, it's almost like the little like strawberry clamshell plastic containers full of turmeric at a lot of grocery stores these days, Whole Foods, Sprouts. I think even at my Fry's, they've got it. So you can buy fresh. Yeah. And if you want with that, cooking with it is great. Or, you know, sometimes people can even like blend that up with some lemon juice and some black pepper. And some people like that as a drink.
Yeah, we're at a real disadvantage here in Wickenburg. I think the organic section's about the size of a small table. So no Whole Foods, no Fry's, no, so that's where it was a very good question, because turmeric is such a healthy component and it does need to get mixed with fat or pepper to be able to help that absorption. So yeah, thank you. That was a good question, Grace. Thank you. And good to see you, by the way. Any other questions? Yeah, Doc, go ahead and unmute yourself. We've got, trying to see what I can do here. Hold on a second, Doc, you're not unmuted. And here you are.
You mentioned something about the minimum daily requirement. The requirements that are put out by the government, I would hope that everyone has learned through the COVID last 3 years, you really cannot trust the bureaucrats in the government for putting things out as recommendations. I find that vitamin D, 85% of people, I live in Colorado, which is sunny as well, 85% of people are low in vitamin D, 85%. Yeah. So only 1 in 10 essentially have a normal level. Then if you take laboratory values and people say are normal, what you want is ideal, not normal. The normal span used to be on vitamin D before COVID. It was 20 to 100. Now it's recommended 30 to 150. Because if you may remember in the beginning of COVID, the people with a vitamin D level over 50 had much less serious complications. Probably, I think I see one man never get their vitamin D level checked. Should we be left out for some reason? We have the same problem with broken bones. We have the same problems with depression. We have this same problems with other things. But vitamin D has been mentioned by both of you is really probably not a vitamin, but a pro-hormone or in fact a hormone. And for it to be depleted, it has mental health effects. It had cancer effects. There were reports of reduced incidence of breast cancer of 40% in women with vitamin D levels over 50. Your doctor likely will say if it's over 30, it's okay. No, it's within the normal range, but it's not in the ideal range. And what you want is more ideal. And so someone who thinks about ideal, not normal, there's big range of cholesterol, but there's sort of ideal ranges. I think it's very important to have someone who counsels you in that way of what is ideal, not just what the lab says is normal or what the government says you should do, because they're not actually very good in taking care of people.
Thank you, Doc. And he really is a doctor. And that is such a great emphasis once again in regards to that recommended daily allowances that hasn't been changed since, as Dr. Laura had mentioned, I think it was since the 1940s when it came about. It just hasn't been adjusted despite the amount of science and whatever the
There-
reasons
There
behind it.
is no vitamin D in milk.
Yeah, and they call it vitamins when it's really
I
wrong.
mean, well, there just isn't it. They say they add it, but vitamin D experts, I have a friend who is almost every world paper that has things about vitamin D, his name is on, says they've analyzed milk all over the United States. There is zero vitamin D in milk. They say they add it, it's not there. You cannot count on it being there. And milk is really not an adult food. It's a food for children of mammals, whether it be a whale or a rat or something else. Milk,
Really good example, because he was talking about getting it tested, and I get my vitamin D tested. Dr. Laura, when you go see her, it's automatic on there to be able to test your vitamin D. And my vitamin Ds are in really, really good orders. And not only am I taking it in capsule form, but I'm also taking it in an additional supplement. And I'm also getting a minimum of that 15 minutes a day outside in the sunshine. And so when we think about those variables for people who do not supplement, you're in trouble, because vitamin D needs to happen within the body. It's just like magnesium and other essentials that we're talking about, has to happen as basic building blocks, as the fuel for our bodies. And this is where, we try to find the right diet, we try to tune those in, and that's where the supplementation, can we do harm? Perhaps. I've not had harm yet. I've had nothing but incredibly good health and, good skin, good hair, all the things that have to build good muscle, despite my 60 years of age, to be able to still do the amount of physical activity. I swear to God, it's because of how I eat and how I supplement. And so this is why nutrition and starting to learn more and more about what we have to have and getting that input to have the right fuels for these engines is so important. Doc, thank you for highlighting that about vitamin D. Once again, it's such a critical one. How about other questions? And Grace, did you have another one, or we just didn't lower the hand yet? You're welcome to unmute. And there we go. And as far as additional questions there, anybody else that would like to add? Looks like Kip, you're unmuted. Did you want to ask a question? Yeah, go for it, girl.
Yeah, and my internet is wonky. I understood when she was talking about the opioid effect of milk. I just love cheese, and it just seems like dairy is getting such a bad rap now. I guess, how much do I have to worry about that?
That's a really good question. Before you answer, Dr. Lauri, because you're also muted, we'll need to unmute you. I was born on a dairy farm. I'm like the fourth generation of dairy farmers. I could not go without milk. And so, but not everybody can digest it. A very small population can, and a lot of people have effects, and it may even be back down to the point of where Dr. Lauri was talking about. It's tuning in for you. Where's your tribe? How was your body made over this course of the past few generations, of whether or not you can tolerate meat or not, or dairy or not. And so Dr. Lauri, if you want to unmute yourself here and contribute to answering that question. See, there you are. Very good. Go for it.
All right. Well, yeah. So dairy is different in the US and Europe. And it's because we have different cows, right? We have different breeds of cows that we lice here versus the ones that they have, say, in England or in Ireland, right? And so personally, when I purchase dairy products, I just try to get them from European sources. So like Kerrygold is a brand of Irish cheese and butter and things like that. And those are good because they're from grass-fed cows. So the difference there is they're fed on grass. And so the fats they pass through to their milk are healthier fats. The other thing is they have different breeds of cows, and different breeds of cows pass different proteins through to their milk too. So other than just the fatty acids, it's the proteins. So you may have heard of like A1 milk or A2, and there's a differentiation there. Sometimes some grocery stores you can buy A1 milk, and that's because it's those proteins, A1 or A2, that can pass through to the milk that The American form is a very inflammatory protein. In Europe, they don't have that. So I don't know if you've traveled much or if you have friends that travel, but they say, oh gosh, I went to England and I just had all the cheese, or I went to Italy and I just ate everything I wanted and I wasn't sick at all. And that's because they just have different cows there. Their production is different. Anyway, so dairy, if you're doing grass-fed, that would be a healthier source. When you're talking about things like the opioids, that's in the casein. And the casein is like a solid protein. Whey is the liquid. So when the whey is gone, you lose that protein when you get like hard cheeses and things. Going off on a tangent there. So the point being, dairy is, yeah, it's for baby cows, right? It's not something humans need. And over the age of 3, about 80% of people's lactase enzyme deficiency declines. So we end up having a lactose intolerance because, over the age of 3, once a human is weaned, they don't need lactase anymore. They don't need to break down milk sugars anymore. So for some people, they can't tolerate it. And that's just because they're adults, they're not babies anymore. Some people have gut disorders though, and they can have a lactase enzyme deficiency because of like SIBO or some other small intestinal problem. So sometimes people can't tolerate milk because they've got an underlying gut disorder that maybe they're not aware of. They just think, oh, if I stay away from milk, I'm fine. But having a lactase deficiency, from a gut disorder means there's other things to address, and staying away from dairy is maybe not the only choice you need to make. Did that answer your question, Kip?
Well, I don't have any issues. I don't have any eating issues. I don't know. I mean, but I'm always around people who talk all the time about their. Either I'm missing the boat or I really don't have any problems with cheese and dairy and this and that. So I was just kind of wondering if I should stay away from cheese. I don't know. It's hard to process all this.
If you tolerate it well and it doesn't cause you any problems, I don't have anything necessarily against it. Something with the kind of sensitivities that we can have or the inflammation that's created from the dairy that we eat is sometimes we have these delayed reactions. So it's, people think of a food intolerance as, oh, I eat it and then I feel bad right away. But we can have food intolerances and things that show up as a delayed reaction. So you eat a piece of cheese and 2 days later, your nose is stuffy, and you're never going to put those two things together. So sometimes we can have a delayed reaction, but if you're eating it regularly and you don't have nasal congestion or skin problems or itching or psoriasis, then you're probably okay with it.
Okay, well, yeah, that answers my question, yeah.
Yeah.
So it looks like I just got a text in regards to Dawn, who may or may not at this point be having some internet issues. And she had a question in regards to insulin. I'm going to go ahead and you can go ahead and unmute there, Dawn. I'm going to ask you to unmute and go ahead and ask your question. Give that a try.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it is breaking up. We'll give it a roll. Or you can text your insulin question.
Can you hear me now?
Well, it's broken. Just talk slow.
Am I still up?
Yes, you are. You can talk slow though, and we'll give it a try.
Yes. How do you get insulin? You said it's a hormone, so how do we get it?
So insulin is a hormone that your pancreas generates, and it's released. That insulin is generated in your pancreas and then it's released into the bloodstream after a meal. So after you've eaten anything that contains any kind of carbohydrates, as soon as your body starts to digest the carbohydrate and that starts to enter your bloodstream, then insulin gets secreted from your pancreas. And then it goes also joins the sugar in the bloodstream. And as it transmits around your body, the insulin is signaling your cells that, there's food to take in. There's glucose to take in from the bloodstream. Every time you eat, unless you ate 100% just pure oil, you're going to generate some insulin. And our body, over time, the more insulin and the more insulin and the more insulin that our body sees, the more likely it is to develop a resistance to the insulin. It's sort of like that funny commercial about nose blindness, where there's like a smell that's around you all the time, so you just start to ignore it. Our cells will do that with insulin. If there's insulin constantly going through the bloodstream, it's just a signal that our cells start to dismiss. And then when that happens, our blood sugar rises because the insulin would pull it down. So insulin sensitivity and having your body only need a little bit of insulin to manage the blood sugar is the key, because as we lose that sensitivity and we develop what's called an insulin resistance, those are the steps towards diabetes. So insulin resistance is something we want to avoid. And the way we avoid it is by having our body only require a little bit of insulin each day. So the more often you eat, the more often you generate insulin. So really the key that I guide my patients on is eating infrequently. So eat 2 big meals a day, 3 big meals a day. Don't snack throughout the day. Don't graze all day long, because every time you eat, you're putting insulin out there. And every time you put insulin out there, you're risking developing resistance to it. Does that make sense?
That was really good in regards to the blindness. So we could call this insulin blindness. And one of the other hacks, I guess, that some people do is to make sure that they are taking a fat or a protein along with their carbohydrate. So those of us, or those in the room that like to have wine at night or have a drink at night, that's pure sugar in a liquid format. It's going to spike your insulin every single night if you're one who likes to have a glass of wine at night. And you can then develop your insulin blindness or develop the predisposition for diabetes. Is that correct?
Yeah, and also insulin it's a hormone that's signaling your body to take the sugar in and store it as fat. So when insulin is in your bloodstream, your body is in fat storing mode. As long as insulin is in your bloodstream, your body cannot burn fat. So again, eating infrequently allows your body to manage that insulin, manage the blood sugar, and then have a period of time where there's no insulin in your body. If you would have like a good 3 hours, with no insulin, then during that time, your body can burn some fat for fuel. But again, if you've just eaten, your body is in fat storing mode and cannot burn fat. So it's also a part of a weight loss strategy. If you're eating too often, that insulin is just going to keep the fat from being able to be burned.
We're going to have a Zoom later on. I think it's like our maybe 2 Zooms from now, and it's going to talk more about carbohydrates, and we're going to get more into this insulin machine and even the value behind fasting and getting our body used to drawing from fat stores, and how, if we're going to have a carbohydrate like a glass of wine, how can you offset that to make sure? But you can see where when we are storing fat, it's because we are spiking the insulin, because your pancreas recognize that there's been sugar released in some format within your body, and it needs to adjust that within the body. And gosh, I love that term, insulin blindness, like with the sense of smell. That's exactly what happens is, and in the storage of fat, when people are trying to lose the weight, and there are certain things that they don't want to give up, the hack or the trick of not eating all day long is such a profoundly powerful trick, is to consume your calories at specific windows of time, and then to not, and let your body get used to drawing from your fat stores so that you can reduce some of the fat that you're trying to lose. Yeah.
And, I think of who promoted that idea to us, starting 70s, 80s, that you need to eat small meals throughout the day to keep your metabolism up. It was the diet and fitness industry, right? They're an industry. They're there to make money. They're there to sell programs. They're not giving you the best advice. They're not giving you the advice about your actual physiology and how your body works. If they're telling you to eat all throughout the day, that's not to your benefit. That's an industry keeping you as a customer.
Well, and it is getting late. You've given us so much of your time. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else that needs to fit in a question before we close? You're welcome to unmute, both to thank Dr. Lauri or to say goodbye to each other or to ask a final question. Dr. Lauri and I'll stay on for till the very end here. In the meantime, as you're exiting, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Lauri and Pam. We appreciate it. A lot of information. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank
Michelle.
you.
Yes, good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very important.
So Pam, is there not a test, a blood test a person can do now that determines, I'm not sure what it determines, your level of insulin resistance? Is that what I'm trying to
Oh,
say?
yeah.
What is
Yeah,
that?
Go ahead and answer, Dr. Lauri. That has to do
Well,
with
there's a variety of different tests. I always, whenever I test my patient's blood sugar, I test their insulin at the same moment in time. So anytime I'm doing a fasting blood draw for blood sugar, I'm looking at insulin too. That's one way to look at it. There are
Okay.
also profiles, different profiles like something called NMR or lipoprotein profiles, where they can actually look at how your fatty acids and your blood sugar and insulin relate to each other, and they can diagnose insulin resistance in that way. So there are a few simple
Okay. all right.
common blood tests that you should be able to get even on like a Medicare doctor's script.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much.
good to see you, Kip.
You too. You too. You're looking great, of course.
So are you.
You're a good motivator to get out there and get those supplements.